Jesus once said, "How can someone enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man? Then indeed he may plunder his house." See, Jesus often spoke in riddles and parables and analogies. And in this analogy, Jesus was saying that the earth is like a house. And the people and the nations of the earth are like the goods in that house. And the devil is like a strong man protecting that house, trying to prevent it from being plundered. That's the analogy. So what Jesus is saying is that in order to plunder the earth of the souls that the devil has held captive and the nations that the devil has deceived, Satan must first be bound. He must be restrained. Someone stronger than him needs to break into this world, into the devil's house, bind Satan that he may plunder the people and the nations, that he may wrest them from Satan's hands. When Jesus spoke this analogy, he was actively doing that very thing. In fact, he said these words as he had cast out a demon, and the Pharisees were accusing him of being a descendant of Satan, of being a part of Satan's kingdom. And Jesus was saying, how can I be a part of Satan's kingdom? I'm destroying it. I am binding the strong man. How can you accuse me of that? In other words, when Jesus arrived on this earth, someone stronger than Satan was here. Finally. And so Satan was bound. In fact, the Bible shows us this binding of Satan from multiple angles. In the Gospels, when Jesus was on earth, we see Satan is actively being bound. It's like it was in the present tense. Jesus was walking around binding Satan. He was actively, presently, in real time, plundering the devil, wrestling lost souls from Satan's house. It's like the coming of Jesus sparked a match so that the nations could see a flickering light, nations who had been in darkness for so long through the deception of the devil. So we can look at the binding of Satan as it was actively happening in the Gospels. That's one angle that we can look at the binding of Satan, the present tense. Or we can look at the binding of Satan from the past perspective, from the book of Revelation. One of Jesus' disciples named John wrote the book of Revelation about 60 years after Jesus returned to heaven and after Satan was bound by Jesus. John received visions of heaven's perspective on real life things that were happening on earth at his time. So in Revelation 20, verses 1 through 3, John offers this unique heavenly vantage point, heaven's view of Satan being bound. He says this, "Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended." Here John sees that when Satan is bound, a new age begins. Not a literal 1,000 years, but rather an age of growing and expanding light out of the darkness. This means that before Satan was bound, before Jesus came to the earth, the nations were being deceived. That was the plight of humanity for thousands of years before Christ came. They were living in deception to the devil. They were in darkness. We can call this age from the time of Adam and Eve all the way up to Jesus, the age of darkness. We thought the Middle Ages were the Dark Ages. That's not true. These were the Dark Ages. It was a very, very long night. But John's vision looked back at the binding of Satan as the introduction of an age where Satan will be prevented from keeping the whole earth in darkness any longer. John implies that after Satan was bound, we are now in an age where the gospel light of Jesus that sparked can spread around the entire earth and set the world ablaze with the light of Christ. The very thing that we have been seeing for the last 2,000 years. That's been the age of Christ. The gospel has been progressing. The church has been growing. The nations have been gathering into the fold of God. The gospel is reaching the ends of the earth, and it will continue to do so. All because Satan was bound. It could not happen before that happened. The souls of this earth could not be plundered. You and I could probably not be Christians. We're not Satan bound. The light has broken through. So you can look at the binding of Satan from the perspective in the Gospels where it's presently happening, or you can look at the binding of Satan from the perspective of Revelation where it happened in the past. But this morning, I want us to look at the binding of Satan from a future perspective. I want us to rewind history about 700 years from the time when Jesus was born, 7 centuries before he bound the strong man. I want us to look at a prophecy from the book of Isaiah and get insight into what the world was like before the strong man was bound. That way we can see the contrast. That way we can appreciate the light that we now live in comparison to the darkness of Isaiah's day, the deception that the nations felt for millennia. So let's get into the book of Isaiah this morning and see what the prophet says about the age of darkness before Christ. Remember last week what Pastor David said about what was happening in Israel at the time of Isaiah's prophecies. A new world superpower was knocking at the door of Israel. In fact, they had already broken into the borders of Israel. By 733, the initial waves of Assyrian invaders, this is 733 BC, the initial waves of Assyrian invaders had crossed the border into northern Israel. And they had already conquered the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, the northernmost tribes. They hadn't sent their whole force into Israel yet. That doesn't happen until 722 BC. But they had already taken the first step into Israel. They were raiding and pillaging the people of God in the region of Galilee, the future hometown region of our Messiah. So, God sent prophets to Israel to explain to them why these things were happening, to explain to Israel why they were being invaded. The prophets were telling Israel some scary things. They were saying that these invasions were actually God's judgment against them for rejecting God, for breaking the covenant with their Lord. Israel had broken their covenant with God, and so he sent the nations of Assyria and then later Babylon to conquer them, enslave them, and take them into captivity. And the idea was that by being conquered, they would then see their sin, recognize it for how horrific it is, repent, and then return to God. That was the idea. That's the idea of God pointing out by judgment, hey, look, you've messed up. You're being now taken into exile, taken captive. And the prophets were the ones who delivered these messages to Israel. They were the ones who tried to help Israel understand the self-imposed darkness that they found themselves in. Isaiah was one of these prophets. Now, our text this morning is Isaiah chapter 8, verses 16 through chapter 9, verse 7. And I'm not going to read that all at once. It's a lot of text. So I'm going to read it one verse at a time and then kind of explain it as we go. But if you've got your Bibles, go ahead and make your way to Isaiah chapter 8, verse 16. And I want to look at this text in two parts. The section in chapter 8 describes the darkness. And then the section in chapter 9 describes the promised light, the light that would come. The first section is the original night before Christmas. And the second section is the dawn of Christmas Day. Our text is long, so I'm not going to explain every single verse, but I'm going to try to pull out the meaning of all of these verses for you. So let's first look at the darkness in chapter 8. Look at verse 16 in chapter 8. It starts this way. Bind up the testimony. Seal the teaching among my disciples. God is speaking here to Isaiah. He's telling Isaiah to bind up the testimony and to seal up the teaching. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean to bind something up? It means to lock it down, right? To lock it down. To seal something. Imagine when you seal an envelope, you're hiding contents in that envelope so that it can't be seen, right? You're saying this is now invisible to anybody who's looking at it. You're closing it. And so when Isaiah is told to seal up the testimony and the teaching of God, this is a poetic way of saying people are no longer going to be able to access the teaching of God. They won't be able to witness his testimony. The meaning of these prophecies are going to be hidden for the contemporaries of Isaiah. The envelope will have to be opened at some future date, but not in Isaiah's generation. God's instructions will be shrouded in darkness. It's interesting, this is the opposite of what God tells John to do in the book of Revelation. In Revelation 22, verse 10, John is told, do not seal up these words of prophecy, for the time is near. For the time is near. For John, the day of the fulfillment of Revelation was close at hand. His contemporaries needed to understand its message. They needed the meaning of the book of the Revelation for their time, for their lifetime. They needed its revelation. They needed it to be opened and not sealed. But for Isaiah's people, his contemporaries, this was not going to be fulfilled in their lifetime. The day of the fulfillment of his prophecies was still far away, 700 years away. And so his message would be sealed. It would be hidden, meaning that the people of his day would not understand these prophecies of God in the age of darkness, except for maybe a select few of faithful people who were holding out hope for dawn in the middle of the long night. Verse 17 makes this point even more clear. I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. So the world is in a pretty bad spot at this time. The plight of humanity was bleak because not only was Satan proactively deceiving the nations, not only were God's prophecies sealed and shrouded in mystery, difficult to understand, but God was also choosing not to reveal himself. It says he was hiding his face. That doesn't seem fair. Like, we're already in the darkness and then you're going to go hide the one source of true light in this world? You're going to go hide your face? You've got all of humanity locked down in darkness and gloom, Satan proactively deceiving people to prevent them from coming to a knowledge of God and a knowledge of the truth. And all the while, the one source of life, light and life is hiding himself. And this was the state of the nations for thousands of years. But in case you're wondering, it gets darker. I know you're hoping for that. Look at verses 19 and 20. And when they say to you, inquire of the mediums and the necromancers who chirp and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Should they inquire of the dead on behalf of the living, to teach and to the testimony? If they will not speak according to his word, it is because they have no dawn. Isaiah the prophet has people stumbling towards him, looking for light. They're lost, searching for answers, searching for meaning, searching for purpose, searching for beauty, and they know to come to Isaiah. He knows stuff. He seems to have insight into another realm. So they come to him and they say, hey, Isaiah, can you talk to dead people? And Isaiah's like, no, I can't talk to dead people. I don't do that. They're like, can you just ask them a question for us? He's like, no, I can't. You should be asking God. You want to know what it's like on the other side of the grave? Repent. Talk to God about it. Give your life to him. He will give you light and life and understanding. But the nations, including Israel, were deceived. They could not understand what Isaiah was telling them. And this is how Isaiah finishes describing this age of darkness. Look at verse 21. And notice where the people look. Notice where they fix their gaze. They will pass through the land, greatly distressed and hungry. And when they are hungry, they will be enraged and speak contemptuously against their God, against their king and their God, and turn their faces upward. That's interesting. So when they want to complain about their plight, they know where to look. They know to talk to God. They know to talk to God. Interesting that just a second ago they wanted to talk to dead people. But when they want to complain, they know who to talk to. They got it. When they're complaining about their suffering, their hunger, their slavery, their darkness. But when they want to be free from things, where do they look? Notice verse 22. And they will look to the earth. And do they find satisfaction? Do they find freedom? Do they find light? No, what do they see instead? Finish verse 22. But behold, distress and darkness and gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into thick darkness. So in Israel's context, they are being conquered by Assyria, a brutal empire that did unspeakable things to people. Israel's husbands are being executed, slaughtered. The sons are being conscripted for military service. Women and children are being trafficked. And while this is going on, the Israelites know where to look to offer blame. They look up. But then for help, they look around. Can anybody help us? Can anybody help us? They don't look to God. And they see nothing. There is no one to help. There is no rescue. There is nobody on earth who can help them. They're in the middle of the darkest night. And West Hills, I feel like I should just point this out to you. That this is the way that the entire world was for thousands of years. Israel was not unique in being conquered by a brutal nation. That was so common. In fact, that was the expectation of any ancient person, that you were probably just going to live. If you didn't die of a disease, you'd be conquered, you'd be enslaved, you'd probably be killed. That was normal in the ancient world. Slavery was assumed in virtually any civilization before Christ. Human rights hadn't been invented yet. It wasn't a thing. Humans were property. If you were stronger, you could control the weaker. Slaves were human garbage. That's why they crucified them, because it didn't matter. And then you could throw their bodies in the dump, because slaves are human garbage. It didn't matter. Women were the property and the objects of men. The poor and the weak were despised because they weren't honorable enough to rise above their station. All of these things that we take for granted today, they did not take for granted back then. Things like human rights, female equality, racial equality, the dignity of the poor and the weak. Guess what? Back then in the age of darkness, during the long night, back when Satan was deceiving the nations, back before he was bound, none of those things existed. In fact, the opposite was actually assumed. And this was the reality of our world since the day that Eve ate that forbidden fruit. But then something changes. Something changes in Isaiah, in his prophecies. He offers a prophecy of hope, like a tiny star peeking through a cloudy sky at midnight. Not enough to light everything up, but it's just enough light to let those who are looking for light know that there is hope. There is hope. And let's look at the light in chapter 9. Look with me at how the prophecy suddenly changes. Look at chapter 9, verse 1. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time, he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. What does all this mean? Well, something you should know about prophecies is that they're usually poetic. It's usually written in a poetic form. And it's not our kind of poetry because it's written in Hebrew, not English originally. But the words are very often symbols that represent things, real things. And also the prophecies are grounded in real history. And so when Isaiah mentions Zebulun and Naphtali and the land of beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations, he's talking about specific places that have historic significance to his contemporaries. But he's also using these things as symbols. To start with, Zebulun and Naphtali, as I mentioned earlier, they were the first places to fall to the Assyrians. It's like that was ground zero for the Assyrian invasion. The first ones to see the darkest darkness were those two tribes. They were the closest, the northernmost tribes, the closest to the Assyrian Empire. They were in the region of Galilee. And so when Isaiah refers to Galilee as Galilee of the Gentiles, he's saying it's because it became a Gentile region. The Assyrians were trampling Galilee. They were there. It was their region now. It had been taken over by Gentiles. It no longer belongs to Israel. So of all the places Isaiah could mention in Israel, he mentions the places that have already been conquered. It was the region of Galilee that the people of Israel were seeing the darkest darkness. And what does he say about these people? There will be no gloom. There will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. Isaiah is saying that the gloom of Galilee will be lifted. Something is going to happen to remove the anguish and the suffering of the Israelites. And it's going to start among those who were conquered first. It's going to start in Galilee. And notice what he says in verse 2. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them light has shone. Now, I need to point out something about the tenses of the verbs in these verses. Isaiah is using a Hebrew poetic device called the prophetic perfect tense. The prophetic perfect tense. You don't have to remember that. It's not going to be on a test. That means that he's talking about future events as if they have already happened. It's a poetic way of saying that this prediction is so certain to be fulfilled that we can talk about it as if it's already been fulfilled. It's that certain. That's why he says, those who walked in darkness, past tense, have seen a great light. As Isaiah is speaking, they are still walking in darkness. They're still in it. Isaiah is saying, they have not seen a great light yet, but I guarantee you they will. I guarantee you they will see a great light. So Isaiah is saying that those who are in the darkest region, in the region of Galilee, they will see the light first. The age of night will finally break, and the day will dawn when the sun rises in Galilee. Notice verse 3. This time he addresses God. And again, he's speaking in the prophetic, perfect way, talking about future things as if they're past. He says, you, God, have multiplied the nations. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. Isaiah is saying that God will do these things when the dawn comes. And the first thing that comes with the dawn is joy. Joy. Gladness, rejoicing, because the people are being multiplied. The kingdom of God is spreading. Joy because the harvest is plentiful. With the coming of the dawn arrives joy in this world. Think about this. Probably the first real joy the earth has ever known since the fall. I can't imagine real, durable, God-like joy in the age of darkness. But what else comes when the light arrives in Galilee? Look at verse 4. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. Isaiah says that when God brings light into the world, he will break the yoke of human oppression. He will break the rod of slavery that beats our backs. This was a prediction to Israel that the light would bring freedom. So not only joy, but also freedom comes with the dawn. And then he mentions Midian. Why does he reference Midian? If you grew up in Sunday school, you probably know the story of Gideon. That's what he's talking about. 500 years before Isaiah was writing, Israel was dealing with a different oppressor. A different nation was invading them. The Midianites in Gideon's day were doing similar things to Israel that the Assyrians were doing in Isaiah's day. But God raised up Gideon to break the rod of the Midianite oppressors. And the story is really fascinating. Gideon starts with 32,000 men. That was a big number of Israelite rebels to muster, to rally together to overthrow the Midianites. That was kind of impressive. When you're reading this story in the book of Judges, you're like, all right, good job. You could do this. And then there's a problem. God tells Gideon, that's way too many. That is way too many guys. If you win, who's going to get all the credit? You will. You have way too many soldiers, Gideon. Get rid of them. So he whittles down his army and he keeps asking God, is this enough? And God says, not enough. Whittle it down more. And finally, he gets his army down to 300 guys. 300 men. And God says, that'll do. That's enough for me to get all the glory, for you to know that this is not a battle in the hands of man, but that this is a battle in the hands of God. And so, Gideon spreads his army around the Midianite camp at night. He gives each of these 300 men a torch and a jar. He tells them, put the torch inside of a jar, and at my signal, they all break the jars. So at the same time, light begins to spread around the camp of the Midianites at midnight. They're thrown into a confusion, thinking that the enemy are among them, so they start killing each other. And Israel doesn't lift a finger. God defeated the Midianites. That's the day of the Midianites, the day of Midian. That's what God's talking about here. This is what Isaiah is talking about. Isaiah compares the coming light with that day. It will be a day in which it is clear that God brings the victory and the freedom, not man. So the daylight brings joy, multiplication of God's people, and now freedom. Freedom that could only be purchased by God, only rescued by God's hand, not by human hands. What else does the daylight bring? Look at verse 5. For every boot of the trampling warrior in battle tumult and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. What does this poetic phrase mean? Isaiah is saying that the blood-soaked boots and uniforms of soldiers will be burned. They won't need them anymore. You won't need your military gear anymore. He will put an end to war. War will not be needed anymore. The way God's kingdom advances is through peace, not through war. So the true people of God do not need their weapons of warfare anymore. They do not need to rid their adversaries by force or by weapons. Peace will reign when the day comes. That's what Isaiah is saying. Okay, so far, Isaiah has said that the dawning of the day will end the long night and it will bring joy, multiplication of God's people, freedom from oppression, and now peace. This is all that is coming with the dawn. And this all sounds great. It sounds amazing. I think the people of God who are faithful, who are listening to Isaiah's prophecy, they're probably hanging on his every word. Like, all right, what else? What else is this dawn going to bring? And then they're probably asking, wait, what's going to initiate this? Like, how will we know that the dawn has come? Who will usher in the daylight? Is it a warrior king? Is it a strong man? What could possibly bring about this day to end the ages of pitch black darkness that we've been living in? Isaiah's answer is very surprising. Look at verse 6. For unto us a child is born. A child. And I can imagine the confusion on everyone's face. You want us to believe that a child is going to usher in the dawn, to end the long night? A child? You expect a baby to bring the dawn, Isaiah? You expect a child to put an end to millennia of darkness, to thousands of years of depravity, slavery, human sacrifice, the strong dominating the weak, men dominating women, rich dominating the poor, thousands of years of poverty, starvation, brutality, warfare, the worship of demons, and a child is supposed to end all of that. Thousands of years of pitch black darkness, and you'll send a child. You've heard people say, perhaps you've even said, this world is so evil, I don't want to bring children into it. That's a human instinct. We look at the darkness and we say, not suitable for children. God looks at the darkness and he said, I'm sending you a child. I'm sending you a child. Let that sink in for a minute. The human instinct is opposite of God's instinct. Why a child? Because God does things the opposite way we would do them. Darkness conquers through strength and through brute force, through violence. Light conquers through weakness, through sacrifice, through surrender. And this wouldn't be just any child. Keep reading in verse 6. What does it say about this child? The government shall be on his shoulders. This means that the child will be the rightful king to the house of David, to rule Israel. But more than that, he will be given the authority of God to rule the universe. This child will be strong enough to bind the strong man. They don't need to worry about that. He will have the authority to plunder the house of the devil. The nations will owe him their allegiance. He will be the king of the kingdom of God. The entire weight of the reign of the universe will rest on his tiny baby shoulders. And you can almost hear Isaiah's listeners asking, well, that sounds insane, but we trust God. So how will we know which child to look for? What will his name be? Isaiah responds with 4 names. And his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, verse 6. Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Wonderful Counselor, because think about it. They've been in darkness. They've been in darkness all their lives. Humanity has been deceived by Satan. God's face was hidden in the darkness. His teachings were sealed up so that people couldn't understand them. So what do you do when you need advice? When you're in the darkness, you need a counselor, right? You need somebody who's outside of the darkness who can speak into it and tell you what's right and what's wrong. You need somebody who can tell you what's true in the middle of darkness. Someone who's not in the darkness themselves, who can see clearly to lead you out. He's a counselor. But also he's wonderful. His name is Wonderful. Wonderful is the name that the angel of the Lord gives to himself in the book of Judges, chapter 13, after he identifies himself as God himself. He says, "My name is Wonderful." I think Isaiah is pulling this name from that moment in Judges 13, saying that this child will be familiar to you, Israel. You've met him before, if you remember the book of Exodus. The angel of the Lord. He wasn't a child then, he was a pillar of fire, but he was still light in your darkness, leading you, guiding you, counseling you. He has been providing light for you in dark places. He has been your guide in the night before. His name is Wonderful. But what about the next name? Mighty God. This name is to remind us that this is no mere human child. No mere human child could lead us out of darkness, could lead humanity out of darkness. This child is human, yes, but he must also be mighty God. In fact, the Hebrew word for mighty God is El Gabor. El is the word for God. Gabor means hero, warrior. This is the divine hero, the God warrior. This child will be a divine warrior. And just like the day of Midian's defeat, mighty God will bring such a sound defeat to the darkness that it will be clear that no human being could have done it. All the credit goes to him. We need a divine hero to bring the dawn. And what about the next name? This one can be a little confusing. Everlasting Father. Christians sometimes get tripped up on this one because they're wondering if Isaiah is saying that the child is God the Father. This isn't saying that he is the Father. Rather, he is eternally like a father towards his people, guarding, providing, protecting, shepherding. That's what a father does. There are times in the Bible where Jesus compares himself to a mother, but here he is being compared to a father. Generally speaking, when you're a child and you're scared of the dark, who do you want with you, mom or dad? Mom's great, but in the dark, if you have a good dad, you want dad there. Mom is probably more nurturing and more compassionate than dad is, but dad is typically the stronger one. Dad is typically the one we think of when we want protection and safety. And so Israel in the darkness, Isaiah is saying, he will be like a father to you. He will protect you. He will provide for you. He will be with you in the dark when you're scared of the dark. And what about his final name that he's given? The Prince of Peace. A prince because he will rule the nations. Peace because he will advance his kingdom not through war and conquest, but through grace and forgiveness. He doesn't use violence to bring peace. He uses peace to end violence. Can I say that again, church? He doesn't use violence to bring peace. He uses peace to end violence. And that is why this child will be called the Prince of Peace. It's an indication as to the way that he will rule. It's the revelation of his heart. It's his demeanor, his character. It's peace. Okay, so this is what Israel was promised in the days of Isaiah. A prediction was given to a generation living in darkness, as their forefathers had done, as all their ancestors had done, as all humanity had done since the fall. So did this child ever arrive? Did the dawn ever break and dispel the long night? 700 years later, this happened. Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for him in the inn. And morning finally came. The night had finally ended. This is the child. This is the child. This is the child that they were waiting for. And they named him Jesus, which means the Lord saves. And that is exactly what he came to do. God sent a baby into the darkness so that we would know his kingdom advances through weakness and folly, not strength and wisdom. This baby was from the darkest corner of the world. He was from Galilee, the place that was conquered first. And so it was fitting that Galilee got to see the first glimpse of the dawn. He was born into poverty so that the poor would find him approachable. He was born as a son of David so that he had the right to Israel's throne. But he was also born a son of God so that it was clear that he possessed by right the throne of the universe. And he was mighty God, the divine hero, who spent his life binding the strong man and plundering his house. And since that day, his light has been spreading abroad throughout the nations, setting people free from the deception of Satan. And this is what Isaiah describes at the end of his prophecy in verse 7. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. I love this so much. His government of peace will continually increase and increase and increase. It will have no end. This is why even after the light has dawned, we are still seeing war today, because the government of Christ is still increasing. It hasn't covered every square inch of this globe. This is why we still see darkness today, because it hasn't increased to cover everything. He doesn't reign over everything yet. That is still coming. That has been in progress, in process for 2,000 years. His government still increases. Isaiah writes looking forward to that day, but we look back with the vantage point of history, and we have seen that the light has already dawned. The long night ended 2,000 years ago, and since that day, we have seen the light continue to increase. His government, his kingdom, his freedom, his joy, his peace have continued to increase ever since that first Christmas. And even though his kingdom doesn't fill every corner of the earth yet, even though his reign doesn't occupy every single heart yet, it is increasing day by day, year by year. You've seen it. This world has seen it. As individuals are rescued from darkness and brought into his marvelous light, they spread that light to their families, and then families are brought into the light, and then cities are brought into the light, and then cultures are brought into the light, and then civilizations are brought into the light. Many Christians have been taught that Isaiah was talking about a future kingdom that Christ will establish here on earth for a literal 1,000 years, future even to us today. But the problem with that interpretation is that Satan has already been bound according to Jesus in the Gospels. He was already bound. And the kingdom began with the child in Galilee, according to Isaiah. It already began. The other problem with saying that is Isaiah says that that kingdom will have no end. 1,000 years comes to an end. This kingdom will have no end, according to Isaiah. This is why I believe that we're living in the age of light right now. That Jesus brought the dawn and ended the long night when he walked on this earth. That he grew up and became the stronger man who bound the strong man. And then when he plundered Satan's house, when he died on the cross, he fully and finally crushed the head of the serpent. Now, snakes are still dangerous even when you've crushed their head. I've told a story about this before. This is why David says I like playing with snakes. I don't like playing with snakes. I like smashing snakes' heads if they're dangerous snakes. And I won't tell you that story again because it's gross. But the point is, if you smash a snake's head, guess what? Sometimes they're still alive. Sometimes they're still dangerous. Incapacitated, prevented from deceiving the nations in Satan's case, but still doing great harm. If you're not a Christian, I want you to think about your values. Think about your worldview right now for a second if you're not a Christian. Think about your values of equity, human rights, women's equality, racial equality, care for the poor. If you lived in the ancient world, none of those things would be your values. None of those things existed. None of those things were core to who you are or core to what you cared about. These truths that we hold as self-evident, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, were never self-evident prior to Christ. All of those values began with Jesus. They were non-existent in the night before Christmas. And you can prove this from history. And now, after 2,000 years of daybreak, those values are assumed in our world, even by non-Christians. Those are core to who we are in the civilized world. In every place where the light of Christ has touched, his values have spread. So what then? What are we supposed to do with a 2,700-year-old prophecy, with something that has already been fulfilled 2,000 years ago? What good is this to us, sitting on a hill the week before Christmas? Here's the value to you. If this child, Jesus, this king, this divine hero, could bring the daylight and end the darkness for all of humanity, if he was that powerful enough to change the trajectory of the earth, don't you think he can change the trajectory of your life? Don't you think that he can bring light into the darkness that you're feeling this morning? If you have darkness because of the suffering you're encountering or the sin that you've committed or has been committed against you, if you're living in darkness right now, who is powerful enough to bring the light into your life but the one who brought light into the entire world and changed our trajectory from deception to knowing God? If he's powerful enough to bring the dawn to the whole earth, he's powerful enough to bring light into your own life. Why not let him bring joy and freedom from slavery and peace into your life, just like he did into this world? How do you get that light in you if you're not a Christian? How do you make that light a reality in your life? Well, you embrace him as your king. You believe in him as your king, as your savior. You give him your allegiance. You give him your whole life. That's how you become a Christian. You say, I don't want to live for me anymore. I'm not wise enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm full of darkness. I need someone else to come in and bring the light. And I know that Jesus is the only one. And you ask Jesus, hey, can you change this? Can you work with this darkness just like you did with the darkness in the world? And he will. Now, if you're a Christian this morning, I hope this prophecy from Isaiah gives you reasons, extra reasons, to celebrate Christmas even harder this year, to find greater joy in this Advent. The first Christmas changed everything in this world, and you live in light of that. Christ brought the morning light and ended the long, dark night. Let's worship him. Let's worship him this Christmas season. Will you pray with me?